and make sure we're all beautiful.
Yeah, there you go. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
You and me both, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a while since we've been able to be the dynamic duo.
Yeah, yeah.
I was much younger. You know, you still look the same, but I was younger. You know, last time.
Yeah, a little bit more gray.
It's the
I
beard.
think we're already live. We'll just give it a couple of minutes to start.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
I think we can start right now. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first session of our new webinar series focusing on elevating and empowering employee resource groups. My name is Jeffrey Cardenas, Director of Growth at Angeles Investors. We just had an amazing year. We just celebrated an incredible 5-year anniversary in our Q1 Summit in Miami. And we have become one of the largest and fastest growing angel groups in the US and maybe even the world. We're thrilled to launch this initiative as part of our continued support to and mission to find, fund, and grow the most promising Latino ventures, and to celebrate and support the ERGs that are building this inclusive wealth and leadership from within major organizations. To help us kick off the series, we couldn't have asked for a better leader than Dr. Robert Rodriguez. I had the pleasure to meet Robert in person in Miami less than 2 months ago, and we had the pleasure to give the first edition of the Angeles Investors Latino ERG Award. Dr. Rodriguez is the founder and president of VRR Advisors, a nationally recognized consulting firm that has worked with over 350 corporations and universities to advance Latino talent and optimize ERG performance. He is the co-author of Auténtico, the definitive guide to Latino career success, and he's also the co-author of Latino Talent, Effective Strategies to Recruit, Retain, and Develop Hispanic Professionals. Today, he'll be leading us in a timely and important conversation about the role of ERGs in supporting entrepreneurs and building inclusive economic opportunity. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Robert Rodriguez. Robert, thank you for being with us and for helping guide the conversation forward.
Thank you, Jesua. And I truly believe this is going to be a conversation. I'm excited to be here with all of you today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Myself and Jeffrey, we want to make sure that our time together is worth your while. So we appreciate you. I'm calling in today from the great city of Chicago, Illinois, the Windy City. If you wouldn't mind, we do have a chat feature there. Let us know where you're calling in from. Jeffrey and I would love to see kind of what sort of reach this webinar is having. In fact, the chat feature is hopefully something you'll become very familiar with, because even though Jeffrey and I are great friends and we're definitely going to engage in a conversation that you find insightful, we really are much more interested in what might be the most pressing questions on your mind. So, I'll be pausing periodically during this next hour or so to see what questions, comments you may have. So please don't be shy. Don't be bashful. We'd love to hear from you. Now, before I introduce Jeffrey, just a little bit more information about my background. I approach this topic from a scholar practitioner perspective. I used to work in corporate America, companies like 3M, Target, British Petroleum, and the Washington Post. And when I was in corporate America, I was a member of an ERG. At one point, I served as the president of the Hispanic Latino ERG at Amical Corporation. And then at one term, I also served as an executive sponsor. So I've been on that side of the equation. And I can say without any hesitation that my experience in employee resource group as an employee definitely elevated my visibility, capability, and promotability, and definitely provided a solid platform upon which I built a very successful career. That's why one of the things that I do is I love to give back to employee resource groups and people who are leading and members of employee resource groups, because I know oftentimes they're doing that above and beyond their day job. Joshua was very kind to reference two of my books, my most recent books. So here's my shameless plug: is Employee Resource Group Excellence, available on Wiley, published by Wiley and Sons. And some of the things we'll be talking about today are things that I, mention in this book. So I'll be providing an external perspective of things that I see, happening today with employee resource groups, but in particular, what Jeffrey and I are going to talk about is how ERGs can be part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, if you will, how ERGs in general can help support Hispanic startups and new ventures, and we're going to engage in that. So thank you for letting us know a little bit. I see some of you are chatting, providing input of where you're calling from. Jeffrey here is someone I've known for many years, and I mentioned that I've had a very successful career, but the reason my career took off and the reason I got kind of famous all over the world is I highlighted Jeffrey in one of my second book, Authentico. And, I have a nice little excerpt on him. Here he is, good looking guy there. Once I let the world know that, hey, I'm part of Jeffrey Martinez's fan club, everyone started reaching out to me. So, that was one of the highlight for me is to talk to people like Jeffrey when I, wrote that book, and we've been friends ever since. So, Jeffrey, nice to see you. Why don't you tell us where you're calling from, a little bit what you're doing these days, and let the audience get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, Dr. Rodriguez, and I will say that was my opening remarks because as a not a shameless plug, but a true plug for your resource in your book. I mean, that was, I don't know, probably 8 years ago, and 3 career levels different. And so I think a lot of it, maybe your influence and impact, I know played a big role in your friendship and discussion and what I've had, just some tremendous career success. So very much thankful for you and your partnership. And again, that's still the top book on my mom's coffee table that she has to show to everyone possible. But obviously, good afternoon to all. A real pleasure to be here and part of this discussion. So I'm Jeff Martinez, head of branch banking here at PNC Bank, which means I get to cover the almost 2,300 branches,
Wow,
coast to coast, from California out to Texas, Miami, New York, Boston, Chicago, Milwaukee, and the 30 states today that we function on a retail bank basis. Obviously, we cover all states through corporate banking and asset management. And I get, again, the privilege of leading the almost 16,000 leaders across our branch. So it's been an exciting part of my journey. I've been now with PNC for a little over 11 years. I'm here today in our headquarters in Pittsburgh. Now I'm in northern New Jersey, in West New York, New Jersey, but I find myself often here in Pittsburgh. And as you mentioned, Dr. Rodriguez, similar, big part of my career has always been connected to EBRGs. And so I've had the privilege of being the executive sponsor, national executive sponsor for both our Latino and multicultural EBRG. And today, now having grown both EBRGs throughout PNC, I've moved the Latino EBRG to another tremendous leader here at PNC, Ray Ocañas, and stay as the executive sponsor for our multicultural EBRG.
Excellent. And one of the things that was interesting is that you call your group the Latino EBRG, and having worked with companies, hundreds of companies, I see a whole bunch of different names for those groups. So maybe that'd be another thing to put in the chat. For those of you listening, thank you for telling us where you're calling from. That's great to see people are dialing in from all over. But if you happen to be a member of a Hispanic Latino ERG, throw it in the chat. What do you call your group? Do you call it Latino? Do you call it Latin, Hispanic? Do you call it Unidos, Somos, Todos? Whatever. We'd love to just kind of a general sense of what some of you may be calling your employee resource groups. But thank you, Jeffrey, for kind of that brief overview. Tell me, can you tell us a little bit more about not just the Latino EBRG, but maybe some, how many EBRGs does PNC have? Roughly, if you know how long they've been around. Just love to kind of get a general scope before we get into the particular topic of kind of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think so. Great way to start us off. So PNC, we have 13 EBRGs.
Wow.
I will say is again, it's titled, and often we hear ERGs. The B is for business. So at PNC, we call them employee business resource groups. And we'll get to why business is so key and intentional in the title. So we have 13 different and distinct EBRGs. And that's really been a pride point around the intentionality, the inclusivity that we want to ensure we cover for all of our employees, whether in person or virtually. Those 13 EBRGs are comprised of 132 chapters, and about 20,000 of our employees comprise the 44,000 members across all 13 chapters.
Wow.
So if you're doing math, that means our employees are so engaged, they're joining more than one EBRG. And that's encouraged because, again, as I'm sure you've heard often, the intersection of cultures, experiences, gender, all that shows up in our EBRGs. And actually last week here, well, not here, but in my home state of New Jersey, we hosted an employee event that brought our 9 local EBRGs all together for a very distinctive and intentional networking event. And so just seeing EBRGs work together, it's probably been some of my favorite events to attend. Just seeing, again, like-minded people, curious leaders, curious employees all coming together for the good of our business as well as the business and communities outside. We have 14 Latino EBRG chapters across the country and 20 multicultural EBRGs. Those together comprise of about 7,000 members. And the reason why I say those synonymous is, again, the majority of our multicultural EBRG members are Latino. And so obviously Wyatt Point was the executive sponsor for both. And so those two, again, really get to highlight the Latino culture, the Hispanic culture within PNC. And it's been growing. Again, as I mentioned, the BBVA acquisition really accelerated the growth between both the Latino and multicultural EBRG. They've been around for quite some time. I think we've getting pretty close to 20 or at least above 20 years. Some of those are newer. Some of the ones that we've recently have added in terms of working parents. So that's been our newest formed EBRG. And we've seen that connect to our military EBRG. As you know, Dr. Rodriguez, I spent 9 years of my life in the United States Army and Army National Guard.
For your service.
And so I take a lot of time with our military EBRG. And so, again, when you find anyone's specific story, you almost ended up joining every EBRG, again, whether to meet good people, be curious, or to attend and listen into some really great events.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things, and this is just to level set the audience before we get into kind of the connection with entrepreneurs. Employee resource groups have been around for about 50 years, right? Most folks consider Xerox having kind of started the first employee resource group back around 1975 when their Black employees kind of create a coalition. So they've been around for a while. Today about 90% of the Fortune 500 organizations have some sort of EBRG or business resource group in existence. Most companies today, if they have these groups, 6 to 8 is the usual number. So you have a woman's, a Black, a Latino, Asian, veterans, pride, disability, those are kind of the usual suspects. But now you are starting to see newer ones, right? Like sustainability, working parents, caregivers. Some companies have even faith-based ERG. So we are starting to see these ERGs not only have been around for a while, but they're really starting to become even more kind of diverse, right, in the kind of communities that they represent. I love the fact of how many of your members are actively engaged. Another data point for our audience is that most companies, when they have employee resource groups, they try to get at least 8 to 10% of their employee population to become a member of at least one ERG. That's kind of minimum. Gold standard is when a company can get 20-25% of their employees to become a member of at least one group. Anything over 35-40% is kind of considered best in class. So I think you guys are well on your way to kind of approaching those numbers based on the members that you said. And then today, the last data point I'll share before we get into kind of how these groups help entrepreneurs is that today the average annual investment in employee resource groups is about $95 per member. So that's not how companies allocate it. But if you have, say, a new ERG that has 100 members, however you define that, well, an ERG of that size will have an annual budget of $9,500, right? If you have an ERG that maybe has been around a little bit longer and they get up to 200 members, well, an average an ERG of that size has an annual budget of $19,000. So that $95 per member. It's a great way for companies to kind of just benchmark to say, hey, are we about average? Are we giving more than that, less than that? Again, that's not how companies allocate it, but it's probably the only way to measure big companies with small companies. So anyhow, just wanted to drop some knowledge, kind of show off a little bit my expertise on ERGs. But kind of getting it back to the topic, I know, I launched my own kind of professional services firm back in, around 2012. And ERGs have been a big part of my success, right? Particularly, Hispanic ERGs. They've hired me and my organization to speak at their events, to provide services, to deliver workshops, to be a resource for them. So as an entrepreneur, employee resource groups have been very terrific. But that's just me. I'd love to hear from you, Jeffrey. How do you see employee resource groups helping startups and entrepreneurs in general? And then maybe if you can tell us a little bit more what PNC maybe does to help startups and kind of new ventures.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes to the core of the mindset of the individual. And what I think EBRGs ultimately at the starting point provide is a catalyst for curiosity. Mm-hmm. And so what I've seen, those that are more ambitious to go to these events, to want to join an EBRG, wanted to join an ERG, tend to have internal characteristics around understanding of the impact of networking, understanding the value of driving visibility. And those fall similar with any of our businesses or entrepreneurs. And so it's almost the mechanics or the energy to want to get up and do something. Yeah. The platform and with our EBRGs are, again, probably the event space for those like-minded leaders to come in and have discussions. So, I've always, and internally and externally, so much falls in similarity with seeking out mentorship, seeking out feedback and advice. It's, again, just what I believe a strong catalyst to get discussions, or again, even just curiosity in terms of wanting to know something new or different. Here at PNC, we even went further. And one of the things I was curious about a couple of years ago, when I looked at promotability of the talent, and this is agnostic to any of our line of businesses, kind of across, well, we had found in promotability of individuals, being in an EBRG was one of the top 5 characteristics of someone who's promotable. Again, and you can lean to some of the earlier comments, there's a little bit of this mindset, energy, ambition, where you're not being necessarily pushed, but like, what's out there? What do you have to offer? And what often we refer to EBRG as a resource. And so just think of, again, whether at an individual or a business, those that seek resources that help them individually, help their business, help them grow. And so, again, it's no surprise that's one of the key characteristics and competencies of a promotable individual or leader within PNC.
No. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember one of my mentors early on when I was incorporated, and at first I was a bit hesitant to join the ERG, to be fully transparent. And my mentor at the time, very bright African-American lady, she said, "Robert, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to move up within the company because you're smart and you work hard. Smart, work hard. Smart, work hard." She said, "Well, guess what? Sooner or later, you're going to get to a level where everybody else is smart and everybody else works hard." And so she asked me, Jeffrey, she said, "Well, Robert, how do you plan to differentiate yourself from all the smart, hardworking people in the room?" Like, that's easy. I'm loyal. I'm dependable. I'm reliable. I'm honest. And she's like, oh, that's so boring. Like,
Yeah.
but Robert, just think about it. If what if you were to not only join an ERG but take on a leadership role, but because now you're developing a strategy, you're managing a
100%.
team, you oversee a budget, and you're doing capital allocation. You're meeting folks outside of your function and business unit. You're elevating your visibility and exposure. So it doesn't surprise me at all what you just shared, that kind of that promotability is kind of, accelerated. The promotional velocity is accelerated for folks who are kind of seeking out those resources and becoming not just a member of an ERG, but more
Yeah.
actively involved.
And it's a great point, and we've seen that. And again, I've loved those that today maybe don't find themselves in leadership positions in their functional business, but want to create the proof case for leadership as they take on the president, vice president, secretary, or treasurer role. They start embodying and creating this leadership profile outside of their day job. So when the
Sure.
opportunity comes and they're in that interview and says, well, hey, Robert, you are an individual contributor. How do you know you're ready to lead? Well, let me tell you about my vice president role in our EBRG and everything you just slated, whether budget management, again, creating curriculums. So it's just been so quintessential. And again, as today we see the intersection between individuals and businesses, I share my first EBRG experience within PNC. And so as I shifted away from my 11 years at Chase, and have now had 11 years at PNC. The first EBRG I joined was the Asian American EBRG. Now, I had a great business partner on the investment side, and she said, Jeff, it was right around the time of Diwali, and said, we're going to have this event. You need to join the Asian American EBRG. I want you to come with this event. And I, like those that know me, I'm as curious as it comes. Yes is my favorite word. I'm like, sure, let's do it. Well, I ended up going to an event where I got to learn so much, or learn even further 10 years ago around the Indian community and what it means to celebrate Diwali. Well, I found myself 2 weeks later in my line of business, in the region that I was responsible for, attending a business-centered Diwali event. We had about 300 Indian leaders, Asian American leaders from the Parsippany area of New Jersey. And I was kind of the senior statesman in this event. And as leaders that represented the community, they were from the community, spoke their words, and again shared their opening comments. Obviously, they gave me the mic, like, "Hey, Jeff, do you want to say some words?" And I think for the audience, especially those in attendance, waited for me to say, "Thank you for coming, appreciate it. Thank you for doing business with PNC. Consider doing business with PNC if you don't." But what I learned from that EBRG event was what Lakshmi represented during that time, the financial impact of that time. It's the time of year where you finish your ledger for last year and start a new financial ledger. And as I started to talk to the community, from what I just recently learned, I saw the jaws drop in the audience because they were like, this guy doesn't look Indian, but yet he took the time to get to know the community, want to represent the community. The amount of business we did in that event was broke records because, again, at the Caddis, now I did not know. So that was my proof point 10 years ago to say there is a lot to this EBRG thing for our employees, for my own development, for understanding cultures better. But if you're in business and you're dealing with business with people, understanding people, important milestones, important cultural aspects, people now see you as someone they want to do business with, not as someone from outside the community. So I always, love that story because I've tried to live it since then. But again, the Asian American EBRG was my first stomping ground here at PNC.
Oh, wow. So, just, further proof that you're a strong ally to others, right? And I love that, my guess is all your employee business resource groups, you don't have to be to belong, right? So you don't have to be a vet to join the veterans or have a disability. So that's awesome. So thank you for sharing that. So Jeffrey, I'm going to transition the discussion a little bit. But before I do that, again, a reminder for those, who are joining us here today, we would love to hear from you. So I see there's a question already in the chat that we'll address in just a moment, but please throw your questions in there. We're going to talk now about talking specifically about ERGs can help, entrepreneurs and startups. But we would love to hear, what's on your mind. So please, throw your questions there, and in a moment we'll pause to see if we can address those. Anyhow, yesterday, Jeffrey, I was up in Minneapolis speaking to the employee resource groups at Best Buy, right? Kind of electronics retailer. We had about 40 people in attendance. But what I thought was really cool was that Best Buy did invite a local entrepreneur, a Hispanic entrepreneur, and to the event, not just to kind of network and meet people, but the topic that we were discussing at that meeting was, business as unusual, like how to thrive during change, right? And they invited this entrepreneur because entrepreneurs are dealing with change all the time. So they said, hey, you're a small startup. You probably don't have extra money to attend training and professional development. Why don't you just come join us? There's no charge. And that entrepreneur got to experience some development about, business as unusual. So I thought that was a great way for an employee resource group to help an entrepreneur, right, in a startup. I'd love to hear if you have any other similar examples or other ways that you've seen, whether at PNC or others, where these ERGs have really helped to, support, fund, or grow a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple things, and even some of it, I remember it was probably 2019, and we partnered with Johnson and Johnson. They have one of their local global headquarters in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where we have one of our headquarters in East Brunswick, New Jersey. And so what we did was collaborate with Johnson and Johnson, brought in both, so we got to collaborate across different lines: finance, pharmaceuticals, and healthcare, and other home goods, and then bring in local businesses to be able to showcase their businesses to a larger audience. And so what that started to do, and these were all connected, it was one of our African American EBRG events. And so we were able to showcase and display local Black-owned, African American-owned businesses to not only see the work that they're doing, and it varied through different industries, but so you get to see, so put some visibility on, and then allow them to be part of the discussion. And so I love the fact that venues can change often, whether you're doing it solely as one company, you're partnering with other companies, but bringing in those entrepreneurs to be part of the discussion, build visibility. I know it still today is probably one of the best events we've ever had. One of the other things we've done, and we've done it just recently, we had Damon John, as many of you know, from Shark Tank, owner of Fubu. Wow. And so we have every month, sometimes even more frequent than monthly, we have these network-wide speaker series. We call them thread events. And these are most of them are available both internally and externally. What a lot of our markets have done through our EBRGs is created watch parties. And so what we've done is we've invited, so the topic, so you can think about with Damon John, obviously his time spent in Shark Tank, what he does to scale medium, small, and large businesses. And so to be able to see that for what often is about 45 to 50 minutes of a discussion, have a networking event prior to that, and then later turn that, what we just learned as employees and as entrepreneurs, into something actionable. Hey, well, I just learned something as an employee, how to service you better as a growing entrepreneur, as a startup business, as an existing business. And our businesses, whether prospects or existing clients or community leaders, are also taking away something. So the opportunity to learn together as both a corporation, as an employee base, as a community base, and as well as businesses, there's so much value in that. Because you've created this kind of seat at the table. And I think of, for a lot of our, again, our entrepreneurs in tech, one about a year ago where we had Reshma Reshwani, the founder of Girls Who Code. And a lot of that was all connected to, again, starting up in the tech space as a diverse leader. And so I've loved internally our watch parties. Our businesses love it. We sell out faster than we, because again, the content's great, the venue's great, and most importantly, the collaboration and discussion is awesome.
Yeah. When I saw you in Miami, it was nice to, be able to go to an Angeles Investors Summit event in person. I've only been in Angeles for a couple years, and it was so impressive when Angeles, kind of highlights some of the original OGs, like the original members of Angeles. So thank you, Jeff, for helping to get this group going and jumping in early. Like you
Yeah.
said, you maybe that was your curiosity, but anyhow, I bring that up because I want to talk about just the topic of investing in general, right? I had some extra funds. I'm like, hey, I'd love to, support Hispanic startups, but I don't really know what I'm doing, right? I don't know what questions to ask, and Angeles helped me, hey, these are things to look for, and let's introduce you to some potential, startups. That being said, when you think about groups like Angeles and others, ERGs can participate in those, right? Particularly
100%.
Hispanic ERGs, right? Do you think that's a great way to just learn about funding and investing and things to look for to when thinking of supporting a startup?
It's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. I think what at the core, and maybe as we kind of simplify or demystify both Angeles investors and ERGs, is a strong community built on having a group think allowed to take some of the gray area or worry where like, hey, I don't know what to ask. Well, am I in the room where someone's going to ask what I've possibly been thinking or not thinking? And that's what both do. Similar with Angeles, and I've loved every single month and investment I've been able to do. And again, as always, thank David and Adela for their leadership, and obviously a lot of the other and all the other founding members, because it's created such a tremendous community. And I feel so similar to when I walk into any of our EBRG events, because it's a community set on curious leaders knowing they want to accelerate their career, their community, and they're just trying to figure out how. Similar with Angeles. Whether you have some discretionary dollars on the side, you've been curious about investing at a ground level, but being in the room where you get to hear other leaders that whether they have the same experience, more experience, or less experience, talk about and start to ideate about what we've just seen or presented. And so again, I think now more than ever, we need strong communities that are centered around building up communities, cultures, businesses, and people. And that's why both work so well. Our ERGs, EBRGs, and Angeles. And I'll add one other nugget in connection. Like one of the things we've liked to do and we've seen here is connecting them to our local chambers of commerce. So a lot of our ERGs and EBRGs are going hand in hand with the business community. And some of those, again, may be more established businesses, but often it's those startups that are looking and, again, working in a financial institution, being at the core of, again, ensuring that we fund, find, and grow all businesses. That Chamber of Commerce continues to be a great way. And again, I think Angeles has just done something really special now. And again, as Josue had started off and said, one of the largest and fastest growing in the country.
That's awesome.
When you get great people together, it becomes infectious. And so I love our last pitch night down in Miami. I'm already excited about the one in Silicon Valley, hoping to host the one, expecting to host the one in Chicago. But it's just a great community. And I always say, seek out the right communities that are meant to uplift.
Yeah, no. And for, individuals like me, I've learned how, a little bit more about investing and questions to ask. So not only have I, invested individually in some startups, but, I've also contributed to the fund. Say, okay, while I dabble in it, let's let folks who do this for a living kind of manage that. But I think what's probably equally as cool is when you see these startups come and do their pitch, right? Like, hey, this is what we're about. This is what the need we're trying to meet, and this is our financials, and this is we're open to funding, and we're seeking this much. So for the entrepreneurs out there that maybe aren't as familiar with Angeles investors, please seek us out. We might be a great way for you to get access to some of those funds. The next thing I want to ask you a little bit, Jeffrey, is a lot of times, particularly larger organizations, they have like a supplier diversity function, right? Where they're always looking to identify new vendors and suppliers, for their organization. And what I've found in some of my experiences with companies is that, employee resource groups, because they're employees, they tend to know who's
Mhm.
in the supplier diversity function. They tend to have at least some idea of how to get connected. Do you have any experience with that, where maybe an ERG has helped connect a startup or an entrepreneur with their supplier diversity folks as a way to maybe potentially get them into that company?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. There's a couple things I'll lay out in what's been kind of a successful function around supplier diversity. One is every chapter has a local executive sponsor. And so
Okay.
I always consider that every chapter needs to put their local sponsor to work. They also have a EBRG sponsor like myself. And so often I review every annual plan by our 20
Hmm.
multicultural EBRGs. And so right off the front, I can see what most of the events are going to transpire already in 2025, give feedback. And so a lot of it is as we come in contact, whether through the ERGs, whether outside in our day job, whether just because, like you said, our local connections, we grew up in these communities, we have friends and families that again, would love to see a larger corporate contract.
Yeah.
Use those local executive sponsors because they're there to be the voice for that lead for that constituent team. At PNC, we also have regional councils that are locally based. We have a regional president in all of our geographies. That's really the face of PNC, both internally and externally. And so, what we've done is created a lot of advocates that allow us to, again, say, hey, here's who I met. Here's what they do. Here's what they believe they can do for PNC. What is the process? And then that is all
Yeah.
localized, as most large companies are in what is often an RFP process. But what we have found is most of our communities don't know the process, don't know the
Sure.
timing of the process. So just like you do for any bid, build awareness. And that's where our ERGs have created a ton of awareness on, hey, great, we're renewing this contract. It's what you do. Get everything ready. We'll run you through the right channels. And then ultimately, as we do and committed to inclusion always, is making sure that we look at every
Yeah.
proposal and pick the right companies doing it. Now, I will say for those out there, pick your audience carefully because probably one of the biggest mistakes I get, I don't want to say mistakes, early
Learnings.
learnings,
Yeah. Yeah.
early learnings is, hey, I'd like to do this, but they don't realize the scale. And so they'll come to me and say, well, no, I can do this for you in New Jersey. I don't have the capabilities to go to California. Well, unfortunately, that's not the way a lot of the contracts work. So
Yeah.
understanding, is this a regional contract, the local contract, the national contract? Because you want to have that preparedness versus just being really excited to say, God, I just want my chance in it. But then ultimately, you may not have the capacity today or have had the experience to deal with some larger scale RFPs that are out
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that, and it's just part of the learning curve, right? And employee resource groups can definitely help with that. I see some questions have come in. Let me see. There was one here that someone wanted to ask you, and there'll be others, but they
there.
mentioned that you said something about the next gen ERG, or like a young professionals.
Yeah,
Um, can you talk a little bit more about that? And
yeah,
do you think you might see more of ERGs maybe moving away from race and ethnicity and more towards like career level because of the environment we're in? Just love to get
yeah.
your thoughts.
Yeah, and it's again a great question.
Hmm.
And so I wouldn't say away, at least here at PNC, and why I started with we have 13 distinct and intentional EBRG chapters.
Hmm.
So the one referencing is called PrEP.
Oh,
PNC
I like that.
recognizes emerging professionals. And so what we hope and what we believed over time, our teams are always in the intersection of a lot of things: age, gender, sexual preference, diverse backgrounds. And so, what we've always wanted to, and we've been proud of, is like, hey, there is in your journey, and again, that PrEP, that recognizing emerging professionals, that doesn't have an age category to it. You can be 35 and maybe just started your career different, or you've had a shift in the industry, and you still may want to figure out, hey, how do I get to myself based on the experience that I have? And so I'd hope to see maybe less of like, I'm going to swap Latino for something less maybe controversial,
Yeah.
to more of, hey, when I look at my entire workforce, when I look at my entire audience, who am I leaving out? And can I be sure from a purpose standpoint, be intentional and inclusive around our EBRGs? So,
Sure.
and I also don't say, it's not like, hey, we're at 13 and, you know, I hope next time we talk, we'll be at 25.
Yeah.
That's not it either. It's not a race to the most.
Yeah.
Again, and when I use intentional and purpose, is because, again, we know we have an audience, and often our employees are the ones talking to us. So I guarantee you, it's not me in a room saying, what am I missing? It's the audience speaking up and saying, hey, I have this background or this experience, and I'd love to be able to put some things together. Again, at PNC, we're fortunate because I often say, build it for me.
Yeah.
Let me know how it works, and then I'll put the resources, like let's get an action. Because if you build it out. So again, I think you'll find more EBRGs, ERGs that complement each other than replace each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And you know, one of the things we are seeing is, you know, some companies are kind of segmenting their groups. You know, I don't know if tiering is the right word, but for example, I worked recently with, you know, Discover Financial, and they had, you know, I think 15 employee resource groups. And they said, you know what, when we look at some of these groups, we want to support them, we want to sanction them. But for example, they looked at their caregivers ERG, right? They said, hey, the caregivers group, they just kind of want to share resources, right? And kind of, hey, are you aware? You know, they don't want to do career development necessarily, or they don't want to do this commerce stuff. So what they're finding is some companies that are, you know, looking at different ways to support different constituencies are just saying, hey, there's different ways we can support them, and not everyone needs to be an employee resource group for the reason that you said. You know, the goal isn't let's have more ERGs.
Yeah.
Let's look at, hey, are there communities here that we can support and help to nurture and create the conditions that would nurture their success in a variety of forms. So we're seeing that.
And
so,
similar, and learn from, build on it, help the community. So a lot of it, and again, if you look at our own statistics, mentorship is a big part of our EBRGs.
Yeah.
Now we have mentorship broadly, whether you're in an EBRG or not. But one of the stats that we've looked, as I mentioned, promotability and it being one of the 5 key characteristics of promotability. It's also one of the largest drivers of retention. And so like often we kind of like EBR, like, what should I do? Like, you keep your most engaged employees, you develop them in a way based on their ambition and curiosity. You curate that in a way that they find a career at PNC or in any organization. And then because it's been built on this structure, they end up giving it back to their team. So they become even greater promoters as they start to manage and onboard. And so if done the right way, like, I mean, this is a way culturally, this is a culture creation, not just like a hobby or a project. And it's not a hobby. It's a big part of our bit, like you said, with a budget, with leadership, with executive sponsorship. And so done the right way, I just think if you're not in this space, you're not growing your company, you're not helping the community, and you're definitely not helping your employee base.
Yeah. Now, you know, I'd love to, you know, switch a little bit and just hear about what you've learned from meeting with, you know, Hispanic entrepreneurs. You know, I haven't done this as long as you have, but one of the things that has impressed me is just Latinas are killing it, right? Like,
for sure.
Latinas I think, are starting up, you know, businesses at a much higher rate than not just the national average, but their Latino male colleagues, you know, they have their act together. So that has been really impressive to see, just kind of that, you know, just the business acumen, the sisterhood, and just kind of really kind of a strategic approach. That's been one of my key learnings, is seeing how Latinos are really kind of the driving force. And any key things you've noticed kind of interacting with Hispanic entrepreneurs over the last several years?
So one, and I've mentioned kind of our EBRGs coming together. I mean, probably one of the most common, and actually they're because of the stat you just listed, our Women Connect EBRG is often it paired up with the Latino EBRG, the African American EBRG, or Asian American EBRG, because we know, again, the gender connectivity, the diversity across some of those ethnicities and races. Together, it's an audience that everyone's very interested in. I just had part of my team out in California for the LBAN conference again, and a big part of that was the Latinas that are continue to grow businesses in an exponential rate. We spend a lot of time, so we have and built through our EBRGs early on with some advocacy programs. So we have the Women in Business advocacy program that spends time for anyone in the field, any employee at PNC, to understand, yes, key factors of growing a business, starting up a business, being an entrepreneur, but what is it through the lens of a female, and especially a diverse female? And so education and information is paramount. We similarly have some of our military advocacy programs. And again, so a lot of that we get to build as a financial institution, just more information and education so we can understand the audience. And I think what's important is I measure it mostly through how many allies do we get in this space. Because again, and I'm not a Latina. My mom has always had an entrepreneurial spirit. She's my reference point. So is my sister and other parts of the community. But I have maybe closer connections to the empathy I may need, the connectivity I may need. If I'm not from that community, am I able to make those connections? So I always, and even in our events, I always say, bring an ally with you, because that allyship transforms into truly that ROI in our community with our business leaders and within the Latino and Hispanic segment.
Yeah, I love that. You know, one of the other things I've noticed in working with Hispanic entrepreneurs is, you know, and it's something that I call the Latino cultural script, right? That sometimes our Hispanic heritage, you know, influences, you know, how we show up in a variety of ways. So, you know, I've seen, for example, kind of that fatalism, right, which is somewhat prevalent in our community, right, where you'll get some folks say, hey, lo que Dios quiere, right? Hey, whatever will be, will be. And so I've seen with some of the entrepreneurs where the focus is on here, now, today, maybe tomorrow, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like, yeah, we'll worry about that later. And so that's been interesting. That I think that's kind of culturally. Any other cultural things you've been able to pick up on as you've worked with Hispanic entrepreneurs, Hispanic startups, that it's either something that's very useful and serves them well, or something that maybe, you know, maybe misinterpreted by our non-Hispanic allies?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, and probably leaning back on resources. And so what I found, the community is in dire need of resources, help, information, and education. And so it is imperative, again, for those, seek it out, because I think there is a part culturally for us, especially for any diverse ethnic background, that like, I'm going to do this on my own.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of this grind that I see and I hear from an entrepreneurs. And often they wait too long to ask for the help. And whether that's internally within family and friends, that's from a financial institution or their network, or seeking out places like Angeles investors or local ERGs that are there to help. And some of it, that help could be monetarily, like you said, through some supplier diversity, some contracts. Some of it could be, again, just the do's and don'ts of your first 2 years in business. And so that's just an important part, that there's enough resources out there and you don't have to do it alone. And frankly, you shouldn't do it alone, because our best businesses are the ones that cast a wide net, both in influence and education, but often in wallet. You know, having that scalability, it's a big part of that scalability. And so just we need to lean in on those resources and lean in on each other, versus often going to a business that may have a like business, not exactly the same, but trying to learn from that as they try to scale their own.
Sure. And you know, you work at a banking institution, and entrepreneurs and startups, they need funding, right? Maybe you can tell our audience quickly, Jeffrey, what should a entrepreneur consider when asking for funding? Why should they go to PNC for funding and maybe not somewhere else, right? Just insights if you can share any on that topic.
Yeah. So I'd start first as preparation.
Okay.
And so one of the things that always is, as a lot of entrepreneurs walk into our branches, work with our employees, I would say probably one of the first and challenging parts is someone else can't fund solely your dream. And so that, think about from a risk management standpoint. Are you looking for a partner, or are you looking for someone to take on all the risk? And so what we've seen our businesses, they have prepared to launch their business with the appropriate amount of capital that they've outlined from their first A to B. Now, that A to B doesn't have to be millions of dollars in revenue, but it does have to be proof of concept.
Yeah.
And what we often get is they want the funding prior to proof of concept. And just like in any business, right? Any bank is their own business. We have to make sure as I have to make my own decisions, what I invest in, what I don't invest in, just here to continue to scale and grow this bank. We look for the same within our small businesses. And so it's making sure that, hey, we're not funding an idea, but we're funding a true proof case. Now, that's where other agencies, and we work really well and hand in hand with CDFIs. And so those are community development financial institutions. And so what you'll find most large financial institutions is we are heavily regulated. So outside of, is it a great idea? Is it not a great idea? There's a consistent platform that all large financial institutions, even more for the larger ones, PNC, the Chases, the Bank of Americas, the Wells, the US banks, that we have to meet certain criteria as we report out. Now, that starts to shift a little bit as the financial institutions grow smaller. That's why I love our community banks, our credit unions. They have a little bit of a different leeway than some of the larger financial institutions. But where we often put our dollars to work is partnering up with local CDFIs. CDFIs lend our money, large financial institution money, to a lot of the promising, growing startups within the community. And so if you don't know and you're on and you don't know what a CDFI is, who the CDFIs are around you, get to know them. They're really at the starting point for a lot of our businesses. So back to us, it's not a no from us. It's let me point you in the right direction with our businesses. It's also the right point as we may have, and you think about different sources of funding. It's where Angeles, comes into place. Again, we don't fund every single pitch that comes to Angeles. Not every idea that gets thrown at Angeles makes it to a pitch night. And so you have to think about, would you invest in your own business if you had the capital? Why would you? What's the ROI? What's the return? And as you get better prepared, those are the ones that are not only getting funding for what they want, they get continuous funding, so they continue to scale and grow.
Yeah. And I've seen that movie before, right? Where Angeles is maybe not, we don't always are saying no, we're just saying not now or not yet, right? You need to mature a little bit more. You need to, provide answers to these questions. Then we might be in a better position, right? And that just makes the entrepreneurs stronger and better prepared to be successful. We only have a couple minutes left. I do want to get to another question here that was asked by Juan. Juan asked, hey, what are some misconceptions about ERGs? Yeah, I'll share one and love to hear if there's one that you have, Jeff. I know we talked a little bit about the allies, right? Some folks like, oh, I'm not Latino, so I can't join the Latino ERG. Another misconception I often hear is like, oh, those employee resource groups, oh, they're the food, flag, and fun folks. All they do is socials and networking stuff. Like, that's fluff stuff. I need an ERG that does real stuff. And for me, that's a big misconception, right? Because I create what's called the 4C model, and it basically says anything employee resource groups do can either are helping create a more inclusive culture, they're helping members with their careers, right? They're doing things out in the community, or they're helping to drive business, which I call commerce. So career, community, culture, and commerce, right? So I think the misconception is that folks don't understand that ERGs, EBRGs have a holistic value proposition, by, appealing and doing initiatives that fall in all four of those categories. So I hear that a lot. Any other misconceptions you hear?
Yeah, I think I'm in one, so why would I join the other? And so
Yeah,
this isn't you don't have to look at if you're at PNC at 13 and say, all right, let me just pick my favorite one. I say, hey, join all of them. Now, again, if it feels right, if you're seeking value, but just joining them. I said, worst case, you're part of a newsletter. You're part of an invitation to certain events on who's speaking. And so I see it as a menu item. Now, again, you want to make sure you're uh, really active, want to be engaged, want to learn. But I always say there's something even maybe the Latino EBRG may have that I say, you know what? I'm not interested in that. That's not something I'm going to attend because you want to show up.
sure.
Back to the whole fun flag,
Food, flag, and
commentary.
fun. Yeah,
You want to show up and be ready to show up. This isn't like it is anytime you have an impression, your EBRG event should have a local leader, local executive, may even have a national executive there. Be prepared to give it your all or don't go, because that impression you may make grabbing a beverage, grabbing some food, finally talking to that hiring manager you didn't think was going to show up, be prepared. And so it shouldn't
yeah,
be just a casual approach to an EBRG. Always ask yourself, what are you looking to get out of it? What impact do you want to make? What impact are you expecting to receive? And how do you continue that energy going after a call, after an event? Because our most successful leaders, as they see it, you kind of said it, EBRGs are not a single event.
yeah,
They may, that's where the energy or the connectivity may happen. But those that keep it alive throughout the year when there's not an event formulate the greatest form of connectivity. And again, I see kind of one of the last questions, how does that impact outside? Like I will share, we've just our EBRGs alone have had probably more than $150,000 in grants nationally last year,
love
over
that.
7,500 hours of community service through either our Grow Up Great program, other community programs. And so it is a way to connect in and out of the EBRG. And if you feel you could do better, then do better. Sign up to be the president.
Yeah,
It's also the part, elections are usually at least a PNC every 2 years. Like if you feel today, hey, that's just this fun place, it's not as impactful or intentional, I recommend go run for president, be VP, be part of the executive team, and be the causation for change.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we're just about at time. Jeffrey, I'm going to give you a chance to say, to drop a final word of wisdom or nugget, mine that I wish to share with, Hispanic entrepreneurs and, Latino professional or any, professional that's joining us here today, that a lot of times folks who are in historically underrepresented groups, we tend to be over mentored and under sponsored, right? We have a lot of folks giving us advice, but we need folks advocating on our behalf, whether as a startup or as an employee. And ERGs are a great way to do that, right? If you're out there elevating your visibility and exposure, more executives are going to learn who you are. And so when your name comes up, hopefully they'll be in that room to say, oh, wait, Amita, that Jeffrey Martinez, he's sharp, he's bright. We should fund his business or we should promote him because I've gotten to know him through some of this work. So it's you're always going to be busy. You're always going to have things to do, but it's those little things. So, and in 30 seconds or less, any final word of wisdom you have?
I'd say our EBRGs, all EBRGs are a venue for success. And so show up the right way. Know that it's been probably the most impactful part of my career. There is no part of my career, whether it's public speaking, built that in our EBRGs. Leadership, built that in our EBRGs. Managing a budget in our EBRGs. And so know that a big part of the confidence that I'm able to speak today is stemmed from that. It continues to push the curiosity and the connectivity to business. And so I think it's a one-stop shop for success. And so why not be part of something that creates so much success for businesses, teammates, and obviously our people.
Yeah. Well, everyone, we're going to wrap up, turn it over here to Jesua, but, on behalf of Jeffrey and I, it's been an honor being the subject of your grace and favor for a few moments. Thank you for being active participants. Thank you for joining us. Jesua, any closing thoughts before we go?
Before I jump into final remarks, I have one last question for both of you, and it's what gives you hope when you think about the next 5 to 10 years of Latino leadership in business and in entrepreneurship?
For me, that's easy. I just the workforce of the future is going to have an increasingly Latino identity. We're a catalyst for economic change. So since we're talking about investing, I guess what gives me hope is the concept that if being Latino were a stock, I'd buy it, right? Because our contributions, our values is going to only increase over time. So that's what gives me hope about the bright future that the Hispanic entrepreneurs and the Hispanic community has in general. Jeffrey?
I would say whether it was my last PNC EBRG event or being at Angeles in Miami, that room just felt palatable and infectious in the energy, in the community, in the sponsorship, in the dollars. I didn't have this 20 plus years ago, kind of growing up through the ranks. And so I think about what the last 20 years have been without it. And I'm so excited for what the next 5 to 10 years look like with it. And so just continue to grow, continue to align, continue to partner, and continue to bring in those allies, because together we can do more.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Wrap us up.
Okay. So finally, I wanted to say thanks again to both Dr. Robert and Jeffrey for your time, your leadership, and your insights today. Your support and thought leadership mean a great deal, not just to Angeles investors because you both are members, but to a broader professional and entrepreneurial ecosystem. There are a couple of takeaways I want to leave everyone with. First, ERGs, as you guys mentioned, ERGs have a unique opportunity and responsibility to support startups and entrepreneurs. Business today, as you guys mentioned, is not business as usual as we used to know. Employees and ERG members with an entrepreneurial mindset are often the most ambitious, right? So they are the ones who drive visibility, building networks, and they are the ones who are getting deeply connected to the communities we serve. The second thought I wanted to leave everyone with is ERGs can no longer operate as silos. Empowering their members to learn about investing, building wealth, and creating meaningful impact should be a core part of their missions. And that's where organizations like Angeles Investors and more come in. So finally, to all attendees, ERG leaders, and members joining us today, this is what we do at Angeles Investors. We're committed to finding, funding, and growing the most promising ventures. And we'd love to partner with ERGs that want to bring investment knowledge, founder access, and deeper engagement to their members. So if you're interested in exploring how we can work together, please reach out directly or visit angelesinvestors.com. So we will be working with Robert into more episodes on this ERG series. And thanks again for being with us, and we look forward to continuing this important work together. Thank you, everyone.
Mucho, mucho more. Great job, Jeff. Ciao.